Good evening, all, and welcome. I hope that you have had a wonderful day and enjoyed all the April Fool's jokes that today has brought. Now, this is a very legit thing. So, last week, or the week before even, I put out news of a competition featuring some other creators within our community. These creators are going to be featured for the next 4 days henceforth: Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, each featuring a different creator. I'm going to be showing you some of their works, well, narrations, in upcoming videos on those days, and on Friday it would mean a lot to me if you would then vote on which one of the 4 you liked the most, which one was your favourite. Now, this is very much a community-driven enterprise and really requires you guys to participate, so it would mean a lot if you could interact, check out the other person's channel, leave comments on this video and their video that I'm going to link as well. But most importantly, come back each day and watch the videos so you can actually vote on who you liked or who you didn't like. And finally, there has been a winner selected for chapter 1 of the book, and entries for chapter 2 have now begun. So feel free to check that out, write chapter 2, and let's get creative. All that info is in the description too. But without further ado, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I worked the overnight shift in a large medical clinic. The place was over 80 years old at the time and had been built on kind of a piecemeal. So it spreads over a few acres and has areas that would be left empty as renovations were being done. It also had research labs, offices, and medical school training areas inside. One night, I was on the 7th floor and heard a ruckus coming from below me. I headed down to the 6th floor, expecting that some construction equipment had fallen over. Now, there is only one large office on the 6th floor, and it's in a big U shape. So if you walk in one door, you can only see the other half of the office. Anyway, I try the first door and it's locked. I walk to the second door and try that one. It's also locked. I get the door open and go inside. I flip the light switch and nothing happens, so I pull out my flashlight. I flip on my flashlight to see a filing cabinet with the drawers open and papers thrown about everywhere. I keep looking, and a couple of desk chairs are flipped over too. There was a computer monitor that looked like it had been slung against the wall, and the blinds had been ripped off one of the windows. As I round the U, I see a shadow out of the corner of my eye. It darts towards the first door. I had tried to open the door, and it flies open. Being young and dumb, I decided to pursue whatever went through the door. I get through the door just in time to see the fire exit door starting to close. I kicked into high gear and exploded through the door. I could hear footsteps about 1 flight below me. I kept chasing the footsteps as fast as I could, and even started skipping stairs. By the time I hit the fire exit at the bottom, the door is just finishing its outward arc, so I keep thinking I can still at least get a description of whoever did this. I exit the door and look to the right. It was the most logical course of travel they exited before the door was fully open. There was no sign of anything. I look to the woods across the street, and there's no one trying to climb the fence. I look to the left and see one of the cleaners sitting beside an overturned bucket, and there was a half-eaten sandwich on one side of him, and his phone on the other. I ask if he saw anyone. He said he was sitting on the bucket when the door flew open with enough force to knock him over. He was convinced I had slung open the door just to mess with him. Then I told him what happened. His response was, "That's why we don't go up there at night." I managed to convince myself it was a homeless person that got in there somehow. Every night guard I told that story to had a similar story from that office though. I also found out it had been empty for months because it was deemed unfit for occupation. They remodeled it a few months later, but the stories kept coming out about people coming in and finding their chair flipped over or their stuff moved. I still choose to believe it was a homeless person, but I never went back there after midnight. I work nights at a senior home. A while ago, we had a smoker that passed away, and ever since then, we have this one door that opens and closes, and we sometimes hear weird noises from it. All of this is independent, mind you. I am bipolar and can experience hallucinations sometimes, but that's not the point. One day I was at work and was watching down a hallway, and I saw something crawling on all fours. It had pointy ears, orange-tainted skin, and a bony human-like structure. It was crawling past some rooms down the hallway. I, of course, shook my head and told myself it was a hallucination. I went and grabbed a flashlight to check the rooms because I was paranoid. As I'm checking, one man is still awake in his lazy boy, which is in front of his door. This man is also very smart and sound of mind. While I pass at the very end of the hall and hear a few bumps and don't hear anything, I go to put the man to bed, who was in the lazy boy, and literally the first thing he asks with a dead serious face, "Where did the goblin go?" My jaw dropped right there. Another freaky moment was when a lady with dementia was alive. She would get up a lot at night and her alarm would sound. We would then have to go and get her. Well, down her hallway it's always dimly lit. Her alarm did not go off, and as I look down the hall I see a silhouette of a shambling woman groaning in a torn dress. I literally shit myself, then found out it was her. My wife is a registered nurse, and she was on float to another unit helping out. She normally worked cardiac, but she was helping out in the Alzheimer's unit. She was saving a particular patient for last, as the patient was known to be a real pain. Very old, mean to everyone, and just generally tried to make the nurses miserable. She and the respiratory therapist got to the patient's room at the same time, and they decided to tackle her together. They got into the room, and the patient had smeared feces all over the walls of the bathroom and the hospital room. She was standing on the bed screaming and jumping up and down on the bed. The two of them somehow got the patient calmed down, got the horrible mess cleaned up, and got their jobs done. She said it took about 3 hours. They then went out and put a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door to make sure the patient could stay calm and get some sleep. They were standing one person on each side of the door, herself and the respiratory therapist, catching their breaths and proclaiming how much that sucked when they spotted someone. A big farmer-looking guy wearing a John Deere baseball cap, overalls, a red plaid checkered shirt, and big work boots coming down the hospital hallway, and he looked kind of annoyed. He walked right past them into the patient's room, slamming the door open. My wife caught the door on the backswing and marched right into the room after him, the respiratory therapist right behind her, fully planning on dragging him back and giving them a piece of their mind. When she got into the room, he wasn't there. No sign of the person she followed in. She looked under the bed, she looked in the bathroom. She checked behind all the curtains. She even made sure that the window would not open. No sign of the farmer at all. She then noticed the patient was sitting upright in bed, just kind of staring off into space. So she asked her, "Did you see anyone enter the room?" The patient said, "Yes, it was my daddy. He said he was coming to take me home tonight, and that you mean people won't be able to hurt me anymore." She responded with, "That's great. How about you get some rest before he comes and picks you up?" The patient then lay down and went to sleep, and died that night. My wife and the respiratory therapist swapped stories to make sure they weren't crazy. They both saw it. This has been ongoing for about a month, but only really escalated to creepy territory tonight. I was almost hesitant to share this, because I truly care about the villain of this story, but it recently became too much for me to hold in and keep to myself. I am a dietary aide at a local assisted living facility. If you're not familiar with those, they're sort of the step before nursing homes. Our residents are healthy enough to live relatively independently, and we only assist them in their daily routine. The one that I worked at really feels like the opposite of a nursing home. Rather than being cold and clinical, it's warm and feels almost like a lavish hotel. My job as a dietary aide is to assist in preparing food, serving food to the residents, cleaning the kitchen and dining room, and all that kind of stuff. Think of it as being a waiter for the same group of people every day. To give you a bit of background, I'm a 17-year-old girl who just graduated high school and is pursuing an associate's degree in pre-med at a local college, before moving away to university. I've been working at this facility for around a year now, and have grown to know pretty much all of the residents. One of these residents is Mary, who is mostly deaf and lives there with her 3 sisters. When I first started working there, Mary and I didn't really talk much or anything, beyond me bringing her drinks and taking her order. I could hardly understand anything she said, but anyway, I knew that she was lonely, due to the communication barrier between her and others. So I attempted to reach out a little bit to her. I would smile and wave and ask her how her day was. It wasn't anything I wouldn't do for my other residents, but it excited her immensely. Mary is a very touchy woman, and by that I mean she likes to touch those she's talking to, pat them, hug them. I'm autistic, and usually jump when touched, but for some reason she never made me feel uncomfortable. I took this as a good sign, and I allowed her to touch me, since I knew it was her way of showing affection, since talking wasn't really very easy for her. It started as pats on the back of the shoulder, then was hugs, then full-on embraces. And now she's at the point where she feels the need to kiss me over and over. This was the point where I become a bit uncomfortable with the contact, but only because I was afraid of how it might be perceived. I have short hair and an overall butchy and masculine appearance, and that makes many residents with memory issues believe that I am a man, and I am also openly a lesbian. One of my co-workers had to be physically separated from a resident who was romantically pursuing her, and I was afraid that my interactions with Mary could be seen as romantic or sexual. She constantly assured me that she loves me and that I'm really sweet, but she's never coming off as flirty or anything. After a few weeks of this, Mary has become persistent. When she's done eating, she stands by the kitchen door as I do dishes and simply watches me, waiting for me to come out and to speak to her. In really busy times, she's waited almost an hour for me to be free, just standing in the doorway and looking in. As I'm serving food and taking orders, she watches me. Co-workers and residents usually find it sweet or funny how she reacts, but she literally won't let me go once she has a hold of me. She's actually a really tiny woman, but she's strangely strong, and even if she wasn't, I can't exactly push one of my residents away. So I'm pretty much forced to deal with the hugs, kisses, and assurances of her love until either I or a co-worker can get it through to her that I have to go back to work. Even then, it doesn't always work out since she's half deaf. But whenever a co-worker comes to my rescue, Mary becomes strangely hostile towards them, holding me tighter and saying that she'll hold me for the rest of my life if she could. Tonight went as usual, with Mary waiting for me and attacking as soon as I stepped out of the kitchen. One of the CNAs told her that I had to get back to work, and Mary gave her the literal dirtiest look, the meanest look I had ever seen her give, and whispered to me that she'd be back later. As a co-worker and I were closing the kitchen, Mary showed up again just like she'd promised. My co-worker was getting the mop water ready in the back of the kitchen, and I had stepped out to clean the counter in the dining room when she latched onto me. "No one can bother us now," she said, and I heard it pretty clearly. She didn't like it, she continued, most likely talking about the CNA that interrupted her. Mary embraced me, kissing me over and over, and told me how much she loved me and how she would love me for the rest of her life. After about 5 minutes, I was determined to go back to work, but she just hugged me tighter. Eventually, someone was trying to get a luggage cart through the dining room, so I tried to break it off and let them through. But Mary dragged me to the other side to let them through without letting me go. And it was nearly 10 minutes before I could convince her to let me go. According to the CNAs, all Mary talks about is me, even when I'm off, and Mary knows I'm off. She waits for me, as though I might somehow show up. I truly do love and care for Mary, and often wonder what made her latch onto me. I don't know if I remind her of someone from her past, or if she just happens to really like me. But it's getting to the point where her life revolves around me, and she's willing to fight against anyone who gets in the way of that. It would be really sweet and cute if she just happened to like me, but she can't stand to be away from me. What really scares me is how she retaliates against everyone in order to be with me. My mum's theory is that Mary knows her life is coming to an end, that she's 85 to 90, somewhere in that range, and finds some sort of comfort with me. Update, June 16th, 2018. You know my theory about how Mary might think I'm a man? Yeah, it turns out that was the case. One of the administrators at work told me to avoid Mary until they could talk to her about the situation. And as I did dishes tonight, we had the kitchen door closed so that Mary couldn't get to me. She started banging on the door, staring at me, when a CNA told her that she needs to leave me alone and let me do my work. Mary then said, "I want him," and the CNAs tried to explain to her that I not only was a girl but also a minor, and this just sent Mary into a frenzy, and she claimed that they were lying and that she wanted to be with her man. She started making threats, both legal and physical, and eventually it was decided that corporate would be brought in and decide if the best option would be to kick her out, since she is technically sexually harassing a minor. I was told by one of my co-workers who was helping to guard the door, and I was stunned, horrified, and a lot of other things I can't really describe. This whole time, all the kissing, touching, holding, it was all sexual. All the times she had invited me into her room, it wasn't just to hang out with me, it was because she wanted more. The woman I had thought as a sort of grandma-esque figure was romantically obsessed with me, and I can't help but feel violated. Even though she wasn't allowed to come near me, she sat by the dining room sobbing, feeling as though her only love were taken away from her. It's sort of a difficult situation, but I truly do love her, but not in the way that she loved me. I know that she's not all there in her head, and wished that I could have known this before reluctantly allowing her to kiss me on the mouth and touch me on the chest and thigh. I just thought that it was her strange way of expressing herself through touch, but it seems like I was simply too optimistic. Mary, as much as I care about you and want you to be happy, please, let's not meet. October 16th, 2018. Final update. You know how Mary would lash out at people who claimed I was a woman? Well, not long after the big incident, I decided to tell her myself, to the best of my abilities, of course, that I was not a man, and I had to repeat it tons of times. But finally she looked at me and asked, "Are you sure?" I nodded, and finally it hit her that I was a woman. Turns out, according to one of the CNAs, she had claimed that I was a man who helped her at one of the local rehabilitation centers, which explains her initial attraction to me. She thought I was someone that she knew. The next day she asked me my name, and I told her. She smiled and said, "I still like you," gave me a hug, and went on her way. Mary finally understood that I was not who she thought I was, and doesn't hold that against me. Rather, she treats me like she does a sister and the fellow residents she's friends with. Warm, but not overly attached. It also turned out that during the period with her unhealthy obsession towards me, she had a urinary tract infection, which tends to mess with the elderly's minds. I'm actually glad she put me through what she did. If she hadn't, they wouldn't have gotten her checked out and discovered the infection so soon. I know my initial reactions to everything were immature, but I genuinely didn't know how to approach the situation. I wanted to protect Mary and make her happy in her final years, but also not promote abusive sexual behavior. Finally, Mary and I can interact in a professional yet friendly way. When I first started in healthcare, I worked at a nursing home in their memory care unit. There were 2 instances that I could think of that legitimately freaked me out while working there. One instance was when a patient was actively dying. She was elderly and on hospice at the time, so it wasn't a huge shock to us that she was doing poorly. We moved her to another place in the building so that her family could be with her without being disturbed. I was doing my rounds. I noticed that her call light suddenly came on. I went into the room thinking that it must have been another resident, or her roommate who could have pulled on the switch, considering that there are 2 switches in the room, and it was common on that unit for other residents to wander into each other's rooms. When I get there, I noticed that there was no one there. I hadn't seen anyone go in or out of that room. There was no one in the bathroom, which was private, so no one could have gotten out of the room without going into the bedroom door. I'm shaken because it was the lady's switch which had gone off, not her roommate's. At this point, my co-worker who just got on her shift comes in to turn off the switch and sees me there. She is just as baffled as me, asking how the switch might have turned on and where the patient was anyhow. I told her where in the building she was, and I kid you not, we both heard the loudest sound of children's laughter go down the hallway. Now, I'm not sure about anyone else, but in my experience in healthcare, anytime you hear children's laughter when there aren't any children around, or someone says they saw random children just wandering around the unit, it usually means someone is about to die. My co-worker and I immediately start looking around the unit to see if there are any children. Yes, there could have been children visiting a loved one, but there were no children on the unit. After 5 minutes, we get a call from the other unit saying the lady has passed away a few minutes ago. I've always thought that it was death who turned on the light, because she wasn't where she was supposed to be. The other instance, when I was working a graveyard shift on the same unit, my co-worker and I were chilling at the nurse's station just trying to keep one another entertained while waiting for our next rounds. It was eerie quiet on the unit, since it had been several hours since the last resident went to bed. It had to be around 2 or 3 a.m. when we suddenly hear the door alarm go off and a man's voice screaming, "Somebody help me!" My co-worker and I rushed down to check who needed help and if someone had attempted to leave the unit. The doors had special locks on them and wouldn't have opened unless you unlocked them with a keycard. Seeing as me and the nurse were the only ones who had these key cards at that moment in time, it would have been impossible for anyone to leave. So while I go check the door, my co-worker went to check on the residents to make sure it wasn't one of them who'd called out. There was no one near the door, and no one in the hallways, and no one awake in bed. It couldn't have been more than a couple of seconds between the alarm going off and us reaching the area. I still can't explain it to this day. I am a night patrol officer at a 55 and older gated community. It's not unusual for emergency personnel to be at a condo at any hour of the day or night. Many of the residents are over 70 years old, and it's unfortunately common that a resident passes away. I've seen many things in my 5 years plus at this post, which I can't explain as normal. Firstly, the Shadow Man. While on patrol one night, I turn onto a side street, and I see what looked like someone running through the window of a townhouse. Take like 5 to 8 steps and just disappear. My headlights, as I was turning, followed the figure, so I was able to see it well. I stop, and still looking in the area that the figure was at, I grab my spotlight and light up the area. I see nothing. No footprint, no noise, nothing at all. The figure would have run through a puddle of water from the sprinklers to get away from there, and there was no splashed water or wet footprints. The figure I saw was a shadow. It looked to me like his feet and hands ended in points. It ran maybe 5 to 8 steps, turning its head, and looked at me, and then just disappeared into thin air. There was no noise, no wind, nothing flapping by the building. Nothing. Another incident I had a couple of years ago was when I had an accident at work and was out for a month. When I came back to work, I was still in pain but used a cane to walk with. It hurt a lot to walk, and I would take my time when I had to lock or unlock buildings. It would usually take me 10 minutes, but now took 20. I remember I was hurting so bad one night and got into the multi-function room, and they just had a dinner that day, so some of the tables and chairs were still put out. My foot was hurting a lot, and I decided to sit for a little bit and prop it up. I sat there for a while in semi-darkness. I was thinking to myself that when I got home I was going to soak my foot and try to relax a little bit, when all of a sudden I felt a comforting hand on my shoulder. I didn't get scared at all when it happened. It was like someone gently squeezing your shoulder as if to say, "Hey, it's gonna be okay." When it happened, I said out loud, "Okay, I'll get back to work," got up and finished the lockup. What happened later that night was the pain in my foot subsided a lot. Even the swelling went down, and I was able to unlock my buildings and not have to use the cane. I will also quite often see people walking their dogs. Now this isn't unusual at all. The community has many designated dog walking areas for residents to use. Now the dog walk area is next to a fence, and they have to cross the road to get back to the condos. But what I see a lot is someone walking a dog, and they are just past the edge of my headlight illumination. I can see them, know they're there, but can't see much detail. When I get closer, they're gone, and this happens quite often. I work nights in a residential home. About a year ago, we had a woman in for respite care who liked to listen to her radio in bed, often soft-spoken talk shows and weather reports. She understandably found them soothing. While my night shifts are anything but quiet due to the unpredictable nature regarding elderly dementia patients, this particular hourly check was rather peaceful. As I turned the corner onto the corridor where the resident was, I could hear faint static with the occasional pop, crackle, and slight fragments of speech. As I got closer to her room, The static grew louder, and the eeriness was compacted by the faint squeak of a hearing aid. I was at her door, which was slightly ajar, and peered in. The only light offered was that of a late-night rerun of an old game show. The woman lay asleep in her bed, static and harsh frequencies quietly humming from her pocket radio. She mumbled along to it, and almost sounded like reverse speech. I lingered for a few seconds to see if I could tell what she was saying, but no dice. I inched closer and put a foot into the room, and the radio fell silent immediately. The program cuts to advertisements, and a door slammed at the far end of the corridor. I'm by no means a paranormal believer, but this is probably the most tense series of coincidences I've had where nothing at all actually occurred. I used to work in an assisted living facility. That used to be the old hospital, before the new hospital was built. This facility, although very clean and one of the better assisted living facilities I have ever worked in, was old and creepy. I worked the night shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. My nights were mostly quiet, and I did a lot of cleaning and the residents' laundry. A lot of spooky things would happen there. I would usually see something out of the corner of my eye while sitting at the nurse's station. I could smell cigarette smoke from this one stairwell that led to the basement, even though they are a no-smoking campus, due to a few residents being on oxygen, and when I would go and check out the smell, no one would be there. The elevator by the nurse's desk would run by itself, and the doors would open, and no one would be in the elevator. I told the manager about it, and she would laugh and say, "Oh, you're being silly. The elevators are on a timer." However, they weren't. They would go off at the same time, and it was never on the same floors. There are 3 floors to the building. The top floor are independent care apartments, a laundry room, an open area for staff meetings or exercise for the residents. The main floor was the dining room, nurse's station and resident rooms, and the basement. The creepy, creepy basement that I hated and would not go down there by myself unless were absolutely necessary. The basement used to be the morgue when it was the hospital, and now was our pantry, medical equipment storage, and now new laundry room. We were only supposed to use the basement laundry room and leave the laundry upstairs room for the independent residents. But 95% of the time, I would use the upstairs laundry room. When I did have to go to the basement, I would literally run and grab what I needed and go back to the elevator as fast as I could. So my last Halloween working there, I was training this new girl. The new girl I had trained for 3 previous nights, and this was my last training night. I found her odd. I had never seen her around before, and that was unusual since the town we lived in was about 1,200 people, and the town we worked in was 1,400 people. You might not know everyone, but you've at least seen them around or knew someone that did. There was just something off about her. She was very quiet and mousy. She said she'd lived in the town for over 2 years, and when asking about her around town, nobody seemed to know her. Since she just started working there, she sent everyone a Facebook friend request and Snapchat. Here's the creepy part. It's 11 p.m. on October 30th, and we arrived to do pass down with the 3 to 11 people, do our rounds and check beds, and start our to-do list. We head down to the basement around midnight to switch our clothes from the washer to the dryer that the 3 to 11 people had started for us. She said she had to use the restroom in the basement, and she would be right there to help me switch out laundry. I head into the laundry room to switch out the clothes and fold the clothes that were in the dryer. I usually never did laundry in the basement, but since I was training her, I was doing everything the correct way. As I'm folding the clothes, I swear I saw her walk past me out the corner of my eye, and she said something, but I couldn't hear her over the sound of the washer and dryer. As I turn to look at her, the lights go out, and I hear a banging noise. I'm absolutely petrified that I back myself up against the wall facing the door, and I'm fumbling to get my cell phone out of my scrub pants pocket, and I shit you not, as the lights come on, she's standing in the doorway and said, "Oh my, that was scary." I get my phone out of my pocket and look at the time. It's exactly midnight on Halloween. We finish folding the clothes as soon as we can and go to head back upstairs. We get to the elevator door and it's closed off with the big safety door that you close when the fire alarms go off. We open it and get into the elevator and go to the main floor as soon as the doors open, and the safety door was closed on the main floor, so we have to push the button for the top floor in case that door was closed as well. I get to the top floor and the safety door was open on the top floor. I go back down to the main floor and notice the break room door was closed, even though it was always open. I tell the new girl that we should probably do bed checks again, even though we didn't have to do them for another 2 hours. All the residents were all tucked in and fast asleep. We were walking down the main hallway and the stairwell, where I smell cigarette smoke once in a while. It has a metal gate that goes across it for safety, and that was open. I closed it and locked it as we went down the hallway into the kitchen. The doors to the dining room were closed. The doors to the dining room are never closed, and they weren't closed before we went down to the basement. The rest of the night was rather uneventful. I only saw the new girl a couple more times in passing after that. I quit in December and moved, and heard the new girl only lasted a bit longer after I left, and the strange thing after that was all of her social media vanished after. I don't know if she deleted and blocked all of us who worked with her, or if she deleted all of our social media accounts, but all of the co-workers and I have asked, and no one's heard from her since. I work night shifts at a care home. Obviously, there have been a lot of deaths with the home, and I am very open/susceptible to experiencing paranormal entities. One night, I was filling in the hourly log notes in the lounge, which has a huge window, so we can see if any of the residents get up. The lights in the hallway were off, to give the residents a calm environment for sleep. The doors situated within the hall were heavy fire doors, and were often sometimes difficult to push open. I saw what looked like one of my vulnerable residents walking along the corridor. I heard the hall fire door bang, which indicated it had been pushed open and left to close on its own. And then I saw her walk back towards the direction she came from, but this time without the bang of the door, which I didn't pay much attention to. I was just concerned about her walking around the hall at 3 a.m. Her room was at the other end of a very long corridor, and her walking pace isn't very fast. Assuming she was disoriented and needing help, I quickly put my log notes down and got up to give her a hand and guide her back into bed, and ask if there was anything she needed. Although when I got up and walked out of the lounge door to look down the corridor, she wasn't there. There was no way on earth that she could have gotten back to her bedroom within the 10 seconds it took me to react. My co-worker also witnessed this, and I'm glad, because I thought I was losing my mind with the lack of sleep. I walked along the corridor using the torch on my phone for light, and entered her room. She was fast asleep. Literally hadn't moved from the position I had put her in an hour previously. I then had to assume that a previous deceased resident was still here and wandering the unit. I hope she's okay and finds peace. I worked in a surgery center after hours with one other employee. Tons of weird stuff had happened, but the most frightening was the following. We were in the post-op area shutting things down for the night. My co-worker comes to find me a few rooms down and asks if I just walk by the room she was in. I say no. I've been here for a few minutes. Why? She then says that she saw someone out of the corner of her eye walking by while humming and wearing scrubs, the same colour I was wearing. A few minutes later we were together and started to walk out of the post-op area after everything was shutting down and the lights were all off. We hear a strange noise, turn around, and see the main row of the hallway lights turn on. They require a switch and are not motion censored. We kind of freak out and she yells, "Okay, who's in here trying to scare us?" We then proceed to walk towards that hallway and check all the rooms in it. Nothing. So we proceed to the product reviewing area and notice that the room/hall had its lights on too. Those are motion activated and we haven't been in there all night. Those lights turn off after 5 minutes of no motion. She goes left and I go right towards the exit door that leads to the parking lot. In the door's window, I see the reflection of my co-worker and also a reflection of a woman who is standing and facing the wall right next to my co-worker, literally 2 feet away from her. I freak the hell out and go sprinting back into the post-op area. She follows me screaming, asking what the hell is going on. I told her what I saw and we got the hell out of there. I've also had a bathroom door slam shut all by itself in that post-op area and the emergency call button be engaged with nobody in it. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for watching. Just gonna recap. You can now start submitting chapter 2 for the book and I'm very excited to see how this story is gonna go. I've read chapter 1, it's beautifully written, I love it. It's just a really good chapter 1. Do you think I should maybe narrate chapter 1 in like a special video just so that you guys can hear it? I don't know, talk to me, let me know down below. Maybe I'll do it if you guys want it and that way you can see how to write chapter 2. And also don't forget that starting tomorrow there are going to be 4 features back to back, so please tune in every day to check them out so we can do votes and have a really great time and have a fun competition. It really needs all of you guys, otherwise it's not a competition, is it? Finally, if you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like, drop a comment, all the good stuff, subscribe if you're new, press the bell icon to be notified every time I post. We have some really good stories every night and it'd be great to take you along. If there's a story which you think is great that you'd like to share, email it to me or post it on my Reddit page. All info is in the description, and be generous with the descriptions when you drop your story. But anyway, for now guys, it's time to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.